Basic heads-up digitizing. In this video, we're going to talk about doing some basic heads-up digitizing. Now, I've already started an ArcMap session here, and the area that we're going to use for example is the area around Yellowstone, around the Old Faithful area of Yellowstone National Park that we've used in previous exercise. Now, I've taken the liberty to load a quarter quad, which is basically 1/4 of an overall quad coverage for the Old Faithful area. And normally you'll be heads-up digitizing in a scenario such as this. You'll have basically some type of base map. It's almost always an aerial image, though it doesn't have to be. It could be like a scanned map. For example, you might have a trails map that covers an area that you were not able to find it in digital form, but you found a paper copy of the map. And then you could have used a process called georeferencing, which is a topic we'll cover in the 210 class. But you could georeference that map to an existing layer and use that as a base map. But most commonly, you've got something like an aerial that's something maybe more up to date. Then you're able to obtain vector data from other sources, so you use this. And remember, you're dealing still with vector data when you're doing the heads-up digitizing, so you're working with either points, lines, or polygons. And so one of the first things you have to decide is what types of layers are you going to digitize. So in this example, let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit around the Old Faithful area and see if we can develop a feel kind of for some of the types of layers that we might want to create. So here you can see sort of from a distance the main road that goes outside of the area. That you can see parking lots. Let's zoom in a little closer. And you can see parking lots. You can see this here is the area around Old Faithful itself. And there's a boardwalk that goes around it. Little ramps that goes out to the boardwalk. So there we've got a lot of line type features. The parking lots could be polygons. Some of the larger buildings might be large enough that you want to make some polygons for those. For example, we can zoom in here and you can see, though it's starting to get fuzzy, but this area here is around the Old Faithful Inn area. Not very sharp, but sharp enough that you could approximate a polygon for that area. So again, we're just dealing with some of the basics here. So we can easily see, though, that we've got some different points, lines, and polygons that we could get. Here's the Snow Lodge area. Before we can actually do any digitizing, though, we have to have some layers to digitize into. In other words, we have to have some blank, empty data layers, or existing layers in some cases, that we want to put data into. And the way we do that is go back to our good old Arc catalog. So I've got Arc catalog started now, and I've made a working folder called GIS 210. And inside that I have an exercise 2 working folder that I've set up. I'm going to go there, and this is where I want to store my blank shapefiles that I'm going to use in the ArcMap session for the heads-up digitizing. And to begin, what I'd like to do, I've got a folder for the DOQ. Let's make a new folder. We'll right-click on the exercise 2 folder, go to New, and then click on Folder. And let's call this Shapes. And inside the Shapes folder, we're going to create 3 blank, empty, new shape files to work with in the ArcMap session. And from our earlier look at ArcMap, we identified that we might want to have some shape files for trails, one for parking, and one for geysers. So we'll just use those for examples. And the way we create those is click on your Shapes file folder and then right-click, go to New once again, and this time go down and select Shapefile. And this pops up a Create New Shapefile dialog. And the first one we want to do is geysers, so let's name it geysers. And it's a point type feature, which is the default here, so we'll leave that alone. And then here's the one chance we get to actually define the projection that we want to use. Since we're creating the file, we can actually define what we want it to be, unlike most of the cases where we've obtained data from elsewhere and we had to know what projection it was stored in and set it to that projection. Here we can set it to whatever we want, and since we're using UTM, let's go ahead and keep it in UTM. That's where our DOQ is stored in. So we'll go ahead and click on the Edit button, and then this dialog should look familiar, where we've got our spatial reference properties. We can click on Select, and we want to go to Projected, and UTM, and NAD 1983. And in this case, the Yellowstone region is in Zone 12. So we'll click Zone 12 and Add, Apply, and say OK. And then click on OK to finalize. And this creates, if we look in this folder now, we see that we have a new shapefile there. And of course it's blank. We can select it and then look in the preview, and you shouldn't see anything there because we haven't put anything in it yet. But we have the blank file now that we can basically edit to put new features into. So now let's go ahead and create two more. Click back on our Shapes folder, right click, New, and Shapefile. This one we'll call Parking, and that's going to be a polygon feature. So we'll click this drop down, click on Polygon, and again define our coordinate system to be UTM NAD 1983. And say OK. And then finally, let's do one for trails. Right click, New, Shapefile, Trails. And this one is a polyline. You think of line, but in ArcGIS lingo, they'll call it polyline. And Edit, Select, UTM, NAD 1983, Zone 12 once again. Okay, we now have our three blank shape files, and we can go back into ArcMap now and begin our heads-up digitizing. We're now back in ArcMap. I've predefined my data view to be in a UTM 1983 Zone 12. I've loaded my DOQ for the region, and now I'm going to go ahead and load the blank shapefiles that I created. They've now been added, and before I start doing anything, I'm going to go ahead and save my project. This will make it easy for me to save on the fly as I'm working. I can just click the Save button periodically. So we'll go to Save As, and in this case we will save it here in the root of our Exercise 2 folder, and let's just call it Exercise 2. Now, we've got our default symbology that ArcMap creates when you load a new layer. Usually it's not what you want, so let's go ahead and tweak that just a little bit. The trails, let's just make them my little symbol selector over here where you can see it on the screen. Let's make the trails, let's go ahead and make those a yellow color, which should show up on this ortho photo pretty good. And we'll thicken them up a little bit to a width of 2. You can pick any color you like. This is just some defaults I'm setting. The geysers, let's make those a little bit larger. I like to use this point symbol with the dot in the middle. Let's just go ahead and make that red. And I'm going to leave it at 18. Actually, let's bump it down just a little bit. Not sure the exact size we'll want till we start creating them, but we'll just default it at 14 there. And then the parking, let's go ahead and change that to a green color, a darker green color anyway. And let's just set the outline to no color, so we'll have a clear outline. Click OK. We'll go ahead and save. But you can do periodically. Now that we've saved it once, we can just click on the little save icon every now and then to make sure we're saving our work in case anything unexpected happens. Now let's go ahead and zoom into the area around the Old Faithful region. And this area here is the Old Faithful area and the boardwalks around it. And I know this from visiting there in the past, so I realize not everyone has been there, so you might not recognize it, but hopefully from seeing where I zoomed in on this photo, you'll be able to find roughly this region here. And just so I can come back to this area more easily in the future, I'm going to go ahead and establish a bookmark and call it Old Faithful. So the first thing we'll digitize is, let's create a point. We're just going to keep this simple, just a basic digitizing example. You can make these as elaborate as you want and collect as many features as you want, but I mainly wanted to show you how to go through the process, make sure you were familiar with it, and we'll put some sample information in here. So for the geysers, since the geysers and trails and parking, we created those all in the same subfolder. And that's important because the way the editing session works in ArcMap is it allows you to edit features that are stored within the same subfolder, all in the same edit session. Now, if you've used previous versions of ArcGIS, that you'll find that the editing module works a little bit differently. In version 10, it seems like Esri likes to change this editing module in just about every version. I'm not sure if it's just difficult to get it right or what the reason is, but it can be a little frustrating if you've used it over the years, because it seems like it keeps changing, and I'm sure it will change again in the next version. But the principle is the same. So let's go ahead and we'll start our edit toolbar. And the way you start that is up here. There's a little button right here called the Edit Toolbar button. And it's got a little pencil with some points by it. And just click on that, and that should open a toolbar that may initially float out on your desktop. You can drag that up to the menu bar if you like and drop it. I'm going to go ahead and put it up here where it seems like it's got a little more room. And then to start the edit session, click on the Editor drop down, click on Start Editing. And what this will do, in our case, it immediately opens a Create Features window. If you happen to have other polygon points or line, I guess basically I'm saying, if you have other vector data loaded that is stored in other subfolders, for example, then you'll get a little window that pops up that basically gives you a warning that is telling you that the edit routine can only edit features in the same subfolder in one session, for one thing. And if you happen to have any layers loaded that are in a different datum, like these are all in 1983, so we've got no problem. But if we had some that was in a different datum, which normally you won't, because I'm always encouraging you to make sure they're not in different datums. But if you did, then you would get a little warning dialog about that as well. And in those dialogues, basically you will click the subfolder that contains the layers that you're wanting to edit. And again, realize you can only edit features that are in the same subfolder in one edit session. So that's sort of the good and the bad. The good is it lets you edit more than one feature at a time in the same edit session. The bad is that they all have to be in the same subfolder. Now you have to be careful when you're editing these features, because it does allow you to edit those in the same session. In other words, like the older version, for example, would require you to select one specific feature that you wanted to edit. You would have to edit that and save your edits, and then open up a new session for a different layer. In a way, that was good because it ensured that all your edits were going where you wanted them to go. This one's a little more powerful and a little more versatile in that it lets you edit more than one feature, but you have to be careful. For example, say you had two different polygon features. Here we only got parking, but say we had parking and buildings, then you'd have to make sure and be careful that you selected the layer you wanted to edit over here in this Create Features window, before you started editing, or else you might put them in the wrong feature and not realize it until you were done. And it's really easy to do that. So you're not seeing those problems here because we've got it really simple here, and we've only got 3 features. They're all separate feature types, and they're all in the same layer or the same working folder. But just be aware of that as you're working with these on your own. And again, experimenting is the best way to learn some of this. So I'm showing you the basics here. You'll want to try these and practice these, and then explore a little bit more beyond that to get even more familiar with this feature. So let's put a geyser in for Old Faithful, a point in for Old Faithful first, and we'll click on geysers. And then we'll come down here and we see that the point is our construction tools. We already have points selected. You can tell because it's suppressed there. So if we drag our mouse out into the view window on the map, we can see that our pointer has a little red dot with it, symbolizing our geyser. And we'll go and approximate where Old Faithful is located, somewhere right in here. And you can see it added a point. You'll see that it's highlighted in blue because it's selected right now. It will stay selected until we click another point, in which case the first one will deselect, or until we stop editing. So in this case, I only want to put the 1 point in because I'm not that familiar with exactly where another geyser location would be. I've got an idea, but don't have it here in this same view. So we'll just keep the 1 point for now. And now we can go ahead and save. If we go back to the edit drop down, the editor drop down, we can either stop editing, save our edits. Let's just save our edits. And then let's go ahead and do some trails. So I'm going to click on trails. And down here in the construction tool, line is selected for us already. And we can zoom, we can pan around and zoom, use our zoom tools, which is a nice thing about the editor toolbar. It does allow you to pan and zoom around even while you're in the middle of an edit session. So the only thing you have to remember is once you pan to the extent that you want to be, then you have to come back over here and select line again out of this construction tools. And these are the boardwalks in this area here where I'm panning with the mouse, and you can see they've got little side trails that goes over to another boardwalk that's closer to the geyser where you can watch it erupt. So you have to pick a starting point. I'm just going to pick this upper left hand corner area, and I'm going to approximate the center of that boardwalk and trail as I digitize. And so if you get off just a little bit, like say I accidentally clicked over here, then you can always right click while you have to get exactly on top of the vertex though. And if you right click, a little context sensitive menu comes up, and you can click delete vertex. That will take out your last point. So now the only thing is it thinks I've finished editing that feature. So, and there we go. If that happened, just click on this straight line segment. The little dialog box that pops up here, this feature construction, is a little aggravating. Sometimes it gets in your way. It will move around as you digitize, or you can always click on it and drag it out of your way, which is what I like to do. So as you can see, as we're clicking through here, we're adding more points, or think of it as adding more vertexes. Okay, and remember your line segments and polygons, for that matter too, are made up of different vertexes. You'll have a beginning point where you start, vertexes in between, and then you'll have an ending vertex or an end point at the end. The red is always your last feature, or the last vertex that you added. So we'll continue adding. And you'll have to kind of get a feel for this in terms of how many points you want to add. You can, I'm going to pan over a little bit while we're discussing. You can go overboard with this. You can put too many points in. If you don't get enough, then your line segment might not follow the feature you're wanting to digitize. If you get too many, then you can end up with a lot of points. If you do a lot of layers, or I'm sorry, a lot of features, you can end up with a lot of points that can slow the display down a little bit or slow some of your analyses down. Not likely, because you're not likely to add that many, but again, you don't want to go overboard with it, so you want to be careful about how many points you put in these, and kind of put in what you need to adequately represent the feature that you're trying to digitize. So now we're coming up on the end of the walkway in this direction. I can end in a couple ways. One, I can double click on the last point that I want to add, or I can right click, and in the menu, if you look down here, there's a finish sketch option. So I can do either one. I can finish sketch. Now if I do the finish sketch, it will finish it with the last point that I digitized. So in this case, my red vertex here shows I'm not quite to the end yet. So I'm not going to use it yet on that menu for ending. I'm just going to go ahead and double click at the last point. Okay, and so when you double click, that finishes the edit session on that trail. I mean, we're still in edit mode, but that took your vertexes away because it basically accepted what you had digitized there. It's still selected, which is why it's blue. Now when we go ahead and start on the next line, I wanted to point out that a utility you want to use is the snapping feature, which is usually enabled by default. And in my case it is, because if I move over to the last point I digitized, if you can see it on your end, a little message pops up that says trails for the layer name, and it says endpoint. So that was letting me know and there's a little box that develops around my cursor. Now if I move along that trail, you'll see it switches to edge, and then if I keep going, you'll see a vertex pop up. So what it's basically doing is ArcMap knows where the vertexes are, and it knows where that feature is, so it knows where the edge of that feature is, and then it also knows the endpoint. All of these are handy because there are different types of snapping that you can do to each of those feature types. Let me show you a little better here. If I go back to the editor drop down, there's a snapping option in here, and I can turn on what we call the snapping toolbar, and that will put it up here on my display here. And you can see by default there are 4 different snapping options, and they're all enabled by default. If I hover the mouse over them, you can see what they are. One is a point snapping, end snapping, vertex snapping, and edge snapping. So they're sort of self-explanatory. The point is a little misleading. The point basically would let me snap to say my geysers layer, for example, because that was a point layer, and it's in the same edit session, so it would let me snap to that. If I move my mouse over to about where, I have to pan a little bit here, but if I move my mouse over to where we digitized that point for the geyser, and if I'm back in the create features mode, then you'll see that when I get so close to that, a certain distance, the cursor kind of jumps over to it, and you'll see geysers point comes up. Now if I go back over to the line I digitized a minute ago, and if I move to the endpoint, again it goes to trails endpoint, and again I've got the edge like I showed you before, and if I keep moving I would find a vertex. So all of these are turned on by default, and that's why it will allow me to snap to any of those. So the other thing you want to keep in mind is what we call the snapping tolerance. So if I click on the snapping drop down, and if I go to the options, you can see that there's a default tolerance that's been entered of 10 pixels. So basically if I'm within 10 pixels of any of those type of points or vertexes, then it will snap to those. Okay, and I'm going to leave it at 10 for now. That's usually pretty good. You could increase it a little bit if you're finding that you're having problems snapping adequately to things. And the only one I really need of these right now is the endpoint. I'm just going to leave them all turned on for now. But really what I want to snap to is the endpoint of where I was digitizing before. So I'll move my mouse over there again until I see the endpoint light up, and I'm going to click one time. And what that did basically is it put a vertex that was exactly on top of the endpoint vertex of what I had digitized a minute ago. The reason this is so important is because it maintains good topology. If you don't snap to things, then you're basically going to either overshoot or undershoot. You're going to not quite get where you want to be, or you're going to get past where you want to be. And it might not show up visually at the distance we're zoomed to now, but trust me, if you digitize it that way and then later zoomed in, you would see where these points are not connecting. And that can cause problems when you're doing analyses. It's also it also can create spaghetti data. I mean, you know, we talked about that in GIS 101 a little bit. You can end up with things that are what we call undershoots or overshoots, and it can be difficult to clean up later. So it's better to go ahead and use snapping and try to get things entered cleanly the first time when you're digitizing them originally, and you don't have to worry about that later on. So this trail is pretty straight, so I'm just going to go ahead and instead of putting multiple points, I'm just going to go ahead and I've got my beginning point. I'm going to move over here to the end of it, which would be about the middle of the boardwalk in this other area, and I'll double click there. And that adds that trail segment. And I'll start the new one here on the front part of the boardwalk. Looks like it begins around this area. I'll click there. And as I move closer to the trail I just digitized, then again I should see the snap feature activate, and it wants to snap to the end point. I'll allow it to do that, and then we'll go ahead and digitize the rest of this. I'm going to pause the video now to save a little bit of time while I finish this feature. So I finished that feature, and I've also made a trail that's connected back to where I began, and I've got a couple more here, the spur trails to finish up. So we'll go ahead and do those. In this case, I'm glad I've got my edge snapping on, because where this trail joins to the existing trails might not have been a vertex there. So this way it will allow me to snap to the edge, so I'm still getting my snapping benefits, and it's locating it exactly where I want to, whether there's a vertex there or not. We'll go ahead and do that for both of these. Double click, and now I'm just going to zoom out to the extent of the trail so I can see what I have here and how it looks. And there you see we've got just a few of them connected there. So let's go ahead now and digitize a polygon feature, which for our example we'll just use this parking lot that's located nearby. And you can see it's kind of a large parking area here. We probably got a little grassy area here in between, so we could digitize around that, or in my case I'm just going to go ahead and include that because I'm not sure exactly if that's a grassy area or not, and just for the sake of time we'll just treat this as one polygon now. And I'm going to go ahead and approximate the edge here a little bit. Let me move this dialog out of the way, and I could zoom in and get this more exact, and you'll want to do that for your case. I'm just kind of doing this quick so that we can see how it works. And again, you know, the extent that you zoom in and the detail that you get it's up to you how detailed you want to be with that. There's a balance, sort of a trade-off here. You can zoom in really close, and it will take a longer time to get your digitizing done, and that may be a good thing, though. You may actually want to get it very precise. It just again depends on your circumstances. So I'll double click. Now notice my little rubber band here. It's already connected to the first point. The polygon will do that for you. So I don't have to click exactly on top of that first point, because it's assuming that that's the end of the polygon, because it's ensuring that the end of my polygon ends where it began. So I can double click basically on the point before I get to that end point, and it will finish that feature for me. It basically keeps it snapped to the beginning point to ensure you've got closure on your polygon. So there we've got our parking lot digitized, and let's just do a trail that connects to the two of these so that you can see that the snapping does indeed work across multiple features as long as they're in the same edit session. So we'll click on Trails and click on Line, And if I move in here, I see my little, you might not see it on your end, but I can see the little trail edge snapping dialog come up. So it's ensuring that I'm snapping to that trails layer. And as I get close to the parking polygon, I should see it light up and it says parking edge. And I'll double click there, and that made sure that it was connected. So that gives us 3 examples. Now again, you might want to have a polygon layer for buildings. You might want to have another line layer for roads, and you might have a miscellaneous point feature for just miscellaneous things that come up. But this gives you an idea of how you go ahead and do some of the heads-up digitizing now into these what were initially 3 blank shapefiles that we created. Now we're still in edit mode, so what we would probably want to do, let's go ahead and close our snapping toolbar. We want to go to the editor drop down and save our edits, and then we'll stop editing. And now you can see these are the features that we've digitized. If I turn off my background map, you can see that they still show up. And that's some basics there for heads-up digitizing. Hopefully this will get you started. There's other things that you'll want to do with this. For example, you'll probably want to enter some attribute information into your attribute tables. We can go ahead, let me show you how to do that real quickly on a couple. We'll just do the geysers for the example here. But this way, make sure you remember how to do that. If we look at our attribute table now for the geysers, you'll see that there's not much there. It's basically the default information that ArcGIS puts in there for you when you create a new shapefile. So we've got our FID, which is just basically a tracking number that ArcGIS creates. The shape, it's telling us it's a point shape, and it has a blank ID number. Now we could enter information in the ID number, or what you're more likely going to want is a name for that feature. So we want to add a name field to the table. Now remember, the funny thing about ArcMap is when you're editing a table, when you want to add a field name, you have to make sure you're not in edit mode when you do that. When you're going to enter information in your table, you have to be into edit mode. So it's a little counterintuitive. So if you ever do, what happens to me a lot is I'll be digitizing and then I want to add a name to my table, and I'll forget to go out of edit mode, and so I can't see the add field dialog. So if that happens, in other words, if this add field that I'm at right here, if it is grayed out, then just check and see if you're in edit mode or not. So I'm not in edit mode now. It will allow me to add a field, and I'm just going to call it name, and we'll change it, the type, to be text. I'm going to leave it at 50 for default for the length. We'll click OK, and notice it created the field, but it won't let me enter information into that field because I have to be in edit mode to do that. So let's go back up to our editor toolbar, and we'll start editing. And when we get back in the same dialog that we had when we were creating our features, a little window opens up because we're using basically the same set of tools to add information to our attribute table that we use when we're creating features. So you can do a little bit of both. It's one overall edit session. So in this case, I want to make sure geysers is active. I've got the table here open already, so I'll just double click in that field now, and let's just call that Old Faithful. Hit our enter key, and you can see it entered that into the record. And since that's the only one we have, we can go ahead and stop to save our edits. So we can click on Save Edits, or if you could just click on Stop Editing, it will warn you, do you want to save your edits? And we'll say yes. Closes the dialog, and we have that information now in our table. So we could actually turn our labels on now, and since we gave it the name of name, usually ArcMap assumes, well, I guess it's assuming the ID. I was thinking it assumed name field, but you'll see a little 0 by that. So we want to go into the properties, and we'll change our labels and change the label field to be name. I'm going to make it bold and italics, And we can click apply, and we can sort of preview it before we close the window here. And you can see it up there. It doesn't appear very large. Let's make it a little bit larger. We'll go to 10 and apply. And that's pretty good for now. So we'll say OK. And we've turned on our labels for that feature. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. That's just a little bit of the basics of editing. If you have your Getting to Know ArcGIS book still, or if you're in the 101 class, hopefully you do have that. You can find it's in, I think, chapters 14, 15, and 16, right in that area is where they demonstrate some of this with a few of the little bit more advanced features. You can enter things in by direction and distance and things like that as well. But I wanted to show you this in case you didn't have access to that, and show it to you on a live session here where you've got data that you're actually creating yourself rather than relying to get it out of the book for somebody else creating it for you. So hopefully this is helpful. Give it a try. Practice with it a little bit. Remember, trial and error is sometimes the best way with some of these things. Definitely just practicing with digitizing, heads-up digitizing. You have to practice with it to get used to it. And I think you'll enjoy that. So give it a try, and we'll be back on the next video.